Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and welcome to the Islamic Take. The Israel-Palestine conflict has unfortunately taken center stage once again. The resurgence in violence has witnessed a violence between both sides. Rockets have been fired from Israel into Gaza, from Gaza into Israel, and unfortunately there have been women, children and the elderly being killed on both sides without any distinction. Media outlets throughout all of this have been playing a public perception and have been playing a very important role in shaping public perception, and have been heavily criticized throughout all this that of perceived biases and imbalances in media reporting. And a lot of the time, a lot of Muslims, particularly those Muslims and individuals living in the Western world, have found themselves to ask the question of how can we mitigate the violence, and also how can we help resolve this. So a lot of the time today as well, we have seen that the Ahmadi Muslim community has played a very public role in resolving this. And today with me I have Asbaz Sahib and Atafat Tahir. Asbaz Sahib is from the Ahmadiyya Research and Archive Center, and Atafat Tahir is from Al-Hakam Weekly. Fat Sahib, I just want to start off just speaking from Khudam perspective, speaking from Khudam point of view. How has the Jamaat Ahmadiyya, or has the Jamaat Ahmadiyya ever taken a stance and condemned Israel for its actions?
If you just read Hazur's statement or even listen to it, just last week, and it's not just last week, it's every time Israel has committed these atrocities, Hazur's very clearly, in plain words, condemned Israel, condemned any kind of death of civilians. So in this case, obviously what Hamas committed was condemnable, and then the unproportionate response that happened, Hazur condemned that as well. And especially with Khudam or anyone else who makes the claim that we're not condemning Israel, they just need to go back to the source, right? Well, if you listen to Hazur's Friday sermon, and by the way, in 2021, when the Al-Aqsa raids happened and what happened in Sheikh Al-Jarrah, Hazur condemned Israel and that as well. In 2014 it happened, and we can go through the history of the Khilafat, our Khilafat Ahmadiyya. It's always been condemned in the strongest terms. So anyone who says that we are not condemning Israel are ill-informed. There's nothing else. They haven't listened to the words of our Khalifa and what our publications have also reported on that. And that's the thing. For example, if I just read some parts of Hazur's sermons out, just from last week. So Hazur started off by obviously condemning the action of Hamas. And he said that, people are saying Hamas initiated this whole, awful scenes which we're seeing today. And Hazur said there is some truth to it, of course. But Hazur particularly mentioned also that they ignore the fact that the Israeli army have been killing innocent Palestinians before this as well. So the story doesn't start from Hamas, right? It starts from before as well. And then Hazur went further. He spoke about how now the situation is so bad that in Palestine, for example, Hazur said the Israeli government claimed that they would completely raze Gaza to the ground, and for this they have dropped many bombs, and they've now reduced the city to rubble, and that's what you can see. And if this is not condemnation, I'm not sure what is. Hazur said the latest circumstances are that they have said, i.e. the Israelis have said to the people in Gaza that they must leave, and some have indeed started starving, as in they should leave northern Gaza. And then Hazur spoke about the UN and how the UN should have been stronger in their condemnation. He said in very clear words, if the world considers Israeli women, children and ordinary citizens to be innocent, then the Palestinians are also just as innocent, right? And it's a long statement, we can go through it later on as well. Hazur condemned the media as well. And one thing about Hazur's condemnation, it's not just condemning Israel, but it's actually giving solutions to stopping this in the future. Because there's no point in just condemning, you have to give viable solutions, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
I also want to ask a question, just moving back to the past as well, we've established that, you know, Khalifatul Masih has an ongoing role in this and has responded a lot of the time, and has also given solutions. But in the past as well, did Jamaat Ahmadiyya at all ever foresee the events with Israel folding out at all?
Yeah. Hamad, if you allow me, I mean, let's give the Khuddam a little bit of a background, because sometimes I get a feeling reading their comments on the social media that it's as if it's something that started a couple of decades ago. Yeah. It's an ongoing issue, and it's got very deep roots in history. And so let's quickly talk about that, and then I can come to that if that's all right.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I think, you know, it's the whole issue revolves around a nostalgia. That's how I see the roots. Because, but we can't go back like 3,000, 4,000, because that's where it goes, you know, the promised land. It was promised, yes, to the children of Israel, to the Bani Israel, back then, in the time of Moses alayhi salam, even before that. So, but then we can't go all that way back. So let's come to the turn of the 20th century, right at the start of the... So we know that there was a lot of persecution of Jews going on in Europe and here and there and elsewhere, and they needed to be moved around, to be settled somewhere. They were looking primarily for a homeland. Now the First World War is very important, and Hazrat Zafrullah Khan Sahib, when he took the case to the United Nations, that's where he started. He said that's where the roots actually lie, because after the First World War, because the Ottoman Empire had decided to side with Germany, so it was seen as an enemy of the Allied forces of Britain and America. And when they lost, Palestine fell out of their hands, just as many parts of the Muslim world did, or of the Middle East did. So once this was out of their hands, it became the British mandate of Palestine. And with that...
So could you also explain the mandate issue?
Yeah, the mandate issue is that it became almost a protectorate. It was to be governed and ruled. I mean, they were to live under the suzerainty of Great Britain. So with that, they were also given a task. Britain was also given a task, was requested by the Zionist leaders, that they needed a homeland. So they promised them. So for them, the Jews, or the Zionists, I would say, I don't want to bring the Jews in, because I want to clarify that somewhere later down the discussion, the Zionists who were pushing for it.
Is it possible to like just define who is a Zionist?
Yeah, the Zionists are those, I mean, yes, primarily by faith they are Jews, but they have a very, very strong geopolitical, economic agenda. And they wanted to settle somewhere, right? And Muslim, and as well as the other Jews, they were looking for a homeland, right? So they were promised the land. So it's a double promise. It's a promise made to them in the Torah, and there's another promise made by Lord Balfour in 1917 that we'll give you a state to live in, or we'll give you a homeland to settle yourselves. Now, again, cutting short, you know, there's a lot of correspondence that goes on between the British government and the Sharif of Mecca. And the Sharif of Mecca wants, having remained loyal all through the First World War, they want the Arab countries or areas or regions with Muslim majority and Arab majority to be given independence. Palestine didn't fall under that, but the Sharif of Mecca did volunteer that yes, we will accommodate the immigrants. But because Britain was in charge, there was a huge misbalance or disbalance, because when they started allowing immigration, the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, they would allow 100 Muslims a month and 1,500 Jews a month. That is how disproportionate it was. And the Muslims of that area, the Arabs of that area, had agreed that yes, we will provide refuge, because yes, they are human beings and they need somewhere to come and settle. But after they had settled, in 1948, when Britain decides to withdraw the mandate and fly back, as they usually did in a haste, they just left. And as soon as they left, the then president of the Jewish agency, or the Zionist agency, David Gurion, I think his name was, he announced the Israeli state. That is where the whole conflict sparked, 1948. And that is when the first Arab-Israeli war happened. And this has been going on ever since, because they announced the state. They were immediately, on the very same day, the US acknowledged and accepted them, their status as a state, and then many, many other countries followed, especially from the West. So that is where the story of this oppression actually starts. And
I think just it's important to mention that the creation also meant the displacement of
course.
around 700,000 Palestinians. They're getting pushed out now,
Yes.
right?
yeah, and go wherever they want. So that is where it goes. I mean, all the way back there. Many attempts have happened. It started off with negotiations. I mean, yes, the war was there, but then the sentiment always remained an Arab national sentiment, all the way up to 1960s, late 60s, when Ikhwanul Muslimun of Egypt jump in with their militant mindset, and that is when we see, and towards 1980s as well, because that militant mindset started appearing, and militant organizations started popping up, and Hamas somewhere down the line did appear with the same militant mindset of Ikhwanul Muslimun of Egypt, the same philosophy of Sayyid Qutb, which was borrowed from Maududi, who is rightly called the father of modern day Islamic militant Islam. So this is where it goes back. So and then all of those negotiations, then things turned into they've taken a very ugly shape. But I must say, Fatih and all of us here, we must say that we've always stood behind the Palestinian Muslims. We still do, and we do very strongly. Like Fatih just said, I mean, how strong could it be? We do very strongly. Yes, if people are used to listening to firebrand speakers shouting and screaming, we don't do that. Our Khulafa have never done. They've done it with great dignity. Whatever they've done it with a lot of grace and a lot of dignity.
And also with that, the grace, the dignity, and also solutions. It's not just empty claims. This is what Qudam need to realize, that you can do activism, you can condemn people, but you need solutions as well. This is why I was so upset in the sense that when the Piers Morgan Mohammed Hijab recent conversation happened, when Piers Morgan at the end he spoke to him, he said, "What's the solution?" He didn't have an answer. It was like a wishy-washy answer. Whereas our Khulafa have been very clear. They've been giving the actual solutions that will matter. And Asab, when we speak about the history of what our Jamaat has done, you will see that. And by not listening to what our Khulafa have been saying, the issue has gone worse and worse.
I think it all comes down to the question where we think about what is the solution. We have the OIC, we have the UN, all of these organizations have been set up. Why isn't it not successful?
They haven't,
Is there just any solution which needs to be just said to everyone?
Yes. Now let's go back to the question that you asked initially, which is a very important question that you raised, and I'm sure you're speaking on behalf of the Qudam when you ask that. What has the Ahmadiyya leadership done? Ahmadiyya leadership did not wake up like other Muslims when the issue had gotten out of hand. Right? In 1939, I mean, first of all, I must mention a revelation of, a book of the Prophet ﷺ, Hamamat al-Bushra, where he says that Allah has informed me and instructed me to do whatever I can for the well-being of Arab Muslims, and I will, inshallah, do that. You will find me resolute in doing that. That's 1839. With a little bit numbers moved around, we go to 1939. In 1939, Hazrat Muslim Maud Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu sends a message to the London Mosque, the Imam of the London Mosque, Hazrat Maulana Jalaluddin Shams. And I must state here for our Khuddam especially to always remember that London Mosque has played an immensely important role in Islamic history, not only in the history of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat. So to the Imam of the London Mosque, Hazrat Muslim Maud sends a message that on Eid al-Adha, he needs to tell the British government somehow how we see the fate of the Muslims in the Middle East. So he calls a meeting after Eid al-Adha, presided by Sir Francis Younghusband, a great Orientalist / traveller with a lot of knowledge of the East and the Middle East as well. And a lot of dignitaries invited from the Houses of Parliament, etc., etc. And that is where Jalaluddin Shams Sahib conveys the message of Hazrat Muslim Maud Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu, that we're deeply concerned about the fate of our Muslim brethren. And we hope that the British government will take into consideration their rights, and their rights will not be usurped. So it starts way back. I mean, like say 9, 10 years before it actually happened, isn't it? It's amazing. It's
So we've
surprising.
been completely involved in
of
it.
course, yes.
Yeah, it's not just been like 1948,
Not
you
at
know,
all.
the Nakba and everything
Yeah,
happened.
when
and
it has
we've all
happened,
got-
and then leaders wake up,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah,
and you know, even when we talk of condemnations, you know, what have they done? I mean, people keep asking, have they condemned this? Have they?
Yeah.
What have these kind of nations done
Yeah.
over the last 75 years?
It's just a pointing and blaming
Of course,
game.
just
It's all
standing
it is.
up and saying, oh, we condemn Israel, oh, we condemn this, oh, we condemn that. Has that ever brought back any results? It hasn't. So in the statements that Fatih Sahib has just read, and I'm sure he might even, you know, read more from there, it's not only about condemnation all the time.
Yeah.
Has someone condemned? Oh, look at the practical solution that's
Exactly.
there.
Yeah.
So we'll come to that in a bit. And then after that, I mean, when this was about to happen, 2 years before this was about to happen, Hazrat Muslim Maud Radhiyallahu anhu published in Al-Fazl his dream, saying that I've been told by Allah the Almighty that a great atrocity is about to strike our Arab brethren.
Oh, okay.
Right, warned them. 1948, when it has happened, he writes a detailed treatise by the title Al-Kufru Millatun Wahida, how the opponents of Islam have united against Islam. And then there is a long history. We'll come into that. Fatih, I mean, I'm sure you're aware, you know, even in the time of First Khalifa al-Masih Rabi, you know,
Exactly.
and Khalifa Salis.
Exactly. And on Al-Kufru Millat Muwahida, as a Muslim, he spoke, he said very, very strong words, like all of our Khulafa have done. And I'll quote that. He said, so this is going before, so the 1946, where he publishes Al-Inzar, a warning.
Yeah.
And remember, this is 1946. The state of Israel hasn't been established yet. And in his Friday sermon, he says, the circumstances faced by the Muslims nowadays are very bleak. The identity of the Muslims in places such as India, Palestine, Egypt, Indonesia is in severe danger. So all members of the Jamaat should especially pray in these days. And then later on, when the state of Israel is created, it was just 6 days after the address you're talking about, the article. He says the enemy has united against Islam despite their internal disagreements. And then he says, will the Muslim Ummah not unite on this? And he's saying despite their internal disagreements, the enemies have united against Islam, meaning Russia, America, all these people are now uniting against the Muslims. And then he goes on and speaks about it. Then during the end of Khalifa Salis's time as well, Khalifa Salis spoke against this whole issue as well, because now it's established, the state of Israel is established. There's a lot of atrocities happening. The Palestinians are getting displaced. You know, there's slowly you're moving towards the formation of Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem. You're getting all these areas where Palestinians, you know, it's ending up into apartheid, right?
So if you continue, is there any, continue reading from Hazur's message, is there any solution at all for all of this? We can establish that it's been going on for a long time.
Very long time.
Ahmadiyya Muslim community has been heavily involved in, from Hazur Muslim, from the second Khalifa, third Khalifa, fourth Khalifa, and now present fifth Khalifa as well. Is there any solution at all to any of this?
Yeah,
Or
so
is it just a blaming game always?
look, the solutions, it's like we're saying, if you start talking about solutions now, straight away, what is it? It's the Jamaat hasn't been talking about solutions just now. It's been going before. When I was a Muslim, I think an Asab, you can address that. But one thing which Khalifa Khamis has been saying, and in fact, Khalifa Khamis also praised the ambassador, the Palestinian ambassador in the UK, who actually said this, that if the international community upholds the international law that's been established, by the way, after you've had so many wars, right? You had World War I, World War II, there were war crimes that happened, there were injustices that happened, there was a lot of freedoms that happened after as well. You had the establishment of international law, okay? It's there to be upheld so that these things don't happen, yeah? In terms of the creation of an apartheid, in terms of what we're seeing today in Gaza. So Hazur has also been emphasizing this, that if all the international bodies act with absolute justice, okay, and it's not something to be taken lightly, right? There's a lot of vested interests involved. There's a lot of geopolitical interest involved, even with Muslim countries. You have the OIC, which was established it's a formation of Muslim countries. They all got together, established in '69, and they said, let's uphold the rights of Muslims around the world, including Palestinian rights. It's been 54 years since that establishment, and they've done nothing.
I mean, Father Sahib, what kind of a cooperation is that even?
Yeah,
I mean, the last conference that they've had, they decided, all the leaders, that we're not going to invite Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, come on, it's one of the major stakeholders in the Muslim world, and it's the center of
There's
Islam.
all these internal disputes happening amongst themselves.
And they've not been able to do anything.
And this is the thing that, you know, is so important in terms of a solution. Until you first uphold international law, number one, and number two, which has always emphasized again and again, and whenever the Palestinian issue happens, he speaks about this. In fact, even when Macron made those statements about Islam, that Islam is in crisis, Hazur mentioned this, he said that if the Muslim world just unites, right, there's so much power in the Muslim, there's so much political power, economic power, geopolitical power. If they unite, no other nation would have even the guts to do anything like they're doing. Right?
I think a lot of the time as well, also I want to remind everyone that this is a live show, so we do have questions coming in completely. So please submit your questions and we'll do our best to answer them. One question actually which I want to address, which comes from others as well, is that, especially from non-Ahmadis as well, is that they're constantly waiting for an Imam Mahdi. They say that an Imam Mahdi is going to come and he's going to end all of this, make it much easier for all the Muslims in the world. We can see from ourselves, from the Ahmadi Muslim community, we have the promised Messiah. How is this helping this?
Yeah, I mean, the Imam Mahdi they're waiting for, and with the type of expectations they've associated to that Imam Mahdi, is actually going to bring about much more violence. The problem that is restricted to Israel and Palestine and the West Bank and Gaza is going to erupt all over. So that's the type of an Imam Mahdi they're expecting. The way they've misunderstood, I know they take it back, they trace it back to Hadith, but it's completely misunderstood. I mean, Islam stands for peace. It doesn't stand for heroes who are going to come and just destroy the peace of the world. So they need to get that right first.
So, you know, with this, I think we do need to also say in black and white what they actually believe. The Imam Mahdi is going to come and he's going to say, either you accept Islam or you face the sword.
Of course.
A bloodthirsty Imam Mahdi.
That's literally their belief. And so, you know what, all the Qudam watching, they need to realize that when you're speaking to your Muslim friends, they need to answer this question. What do you actually believe about the Imam Mahdi?
Of course.
And they will also have to join the Imam Mahdi.
Yes.
Right? You can't just go, you do the work. You have to join them in that work, which is killing.
And then when we speak about solutions, yes, one of the solutions that like I said, too much of it is nostalgia and too much of it is fantasy, you know, around the whole of the situation. And before I say anything about the Muslims, I must repeat, standing behind our Khulafa, every single Ahmadi is standing behind all Muslims of Palestine. And we strongly condemn what Israel has been doing. But I must equally strongly also emphasize that by condemning Israel, we don't automatically stand behind a militant organization, which is killing civilians again. Because the Holy Quran and because the Holy Prophet has not taught hatred for the Jews. That is what, again, Muslims are doing. Keep the Zionist agenda on side and do whatever you like with it, but just, you know, generally saying, oh, kill the Jews because they're this, they're that. No, that's not right.
A lot of people also ask the question that Jamaat's stance is very neutral on this.
I don't think it is. Like I said, I mean, if they're expecting a firebrand kind of, you know, whatever, they don't do that. I mean, our Khulafa do things with a lot of dignity and grace. And that's the beauty of the way they do it.
And fairness, right?
And fairness.
You can't say that what Hamas did was right in any way, like in the sense that they killed innocent civilians.
Speaking of, you know, fairness as well, the UN suggested just a few days ago that we should suggest a ceasefire, right? US vetoed this. Rishi Sunak, we were speaking it earlier again, Rishi Sunak rejected this morning.
Just today, he said he didn't. This is the hypocrisy which, by the way, again, I would urge Qudam to go to Hazur's statement just last Friday, where Hazur said that it's as if these world powers, the Western powers, who are supporting Israel, they just want to fan the fuel of war. You know, they just want to keep it going. They're not condemning it. They're vetoing ceasefires. I mean, can you imagine the stuff that you're seeing on social media? It's, you know, people are fatigued by seeing all these dead bodies of kids and things. And then you have world leaders who are vetoing a ceasefire, who are saying that, no, the Israeli bombing must continue in the name of self-defense. It makes no... I don't understand where the humanity's gone. It doesn't make any sense. And this is, by the way, Hazur's referring to this, that these guys, they're just hell-bent on war. Hazur also said in his sermon that everyone's talking about sending armies, and that's what's happening, right? There was a report of the USA sending 2,500 Marines to help. There's all sorts of weaponry obviously being sold to Israel to continue. And one thing which Hazur did say, he mentioned in 2014 and also 2021, he said when the Palestinians reply Hamas, it's like they're using sticks. And it's also recently been on social media that their rockets can't create a lot of damage, right? Yeah. And on the opposing side, you have the Israeli army who are using very sophisticated artillery and bombs and so on and so forth. So there's not a match anyway.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There's no match at all.
Absolutely. You know, you just spoke about the solution given by Hazrat Khalifatul Masih. And we've listened to some of the wonderful words and enlightening words of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih and the previous Khulafa as well. It's always been, you know, on their top priority. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih IV, rahimahullah, when he assumed the office of Khalifatul Masih in June 1982, only 3 days after, that shows how the priorities have been set all along. On the third day of him becoming Khalifa, he issued a statement which was printed, published in Al-Fazl and sent all across to all Ahmadis around the world, where among the top priorities, one was to pray for the Muslims of Palestine. Right? So that shows it. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih V, ever since he assumed office as Khalifatul Masih in the year 2003, April 2003, he's been talking about the Arab world. I mean, not only Palestine. If we go back to 2012, was it the Arab Spring? And look at the series of sermons that he delivered there. I can say this with a lot of responsibility. And when I say this, I'm putting my Ahmadiyyat out of this room, out of the studio. And I speak very neutrally when I say this. There is absolutely no leader in the Muslim leader or any other leader who has expressed so much sympathy with practical solutions and realistic solutions. So because, you know, when, like I said, I'm saying this, I'm taking responsibility for what I'm saying. Bring an example and we can see who there is.
I feel like a lot of people, they would listen to only maybe one sermon here, one sermon there. You need to look at the full picture. Has always been speaking about for, like you said, over 20 years now.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also just bouncing off what you've just said, 100% right. When we heard Hazur's statement last Friday, 13th of October, about this whole issue, there was condemnation there, there was solutions there, there was the hypocrisy in the media there, by the way, of the Western nations, and it was so balanced in the way that if the world listened to it and acted on it, the solution will be resolved. And it's, for me, because obviously we're all following the tragic events, you're listening to the commentary, you're listening to different people come on, and it was just the most beautiful answer addressing the whole situation and actually giving a solution. We want de-escalation right now. That's the first thing. And then we don't want escalation after this again. And Hazur's giving those solutions. And that's why Khuddam need to go and read those words. They need to read them.
I must say, you know, we're talking to Ahmadi Khuddam right now. Right? Talking to Ahmadi Khuddam right now. About a week and a half ago, I had a professor who teaches Islamic history in one of the great universities of the world. And when I met him, he said, I want to order some books. I said, what do you exactly want to order? So, because he was asking where I order them from. And he said, I want the whole set of Khutbat Masroor. He said, I listened to them. He knows Urdu as well. He learned Urdu back in 1980s. He said, I've listened to them, but I want a whole set of that. So, if they are the people who don't even believe in Khalifatul Masih as Khalifatul Masih, it's incumbent upon us more than anybody else as Ahmadis that we should be reading, going back, reading, listening again to the Friday sermon and the instruction therein. Can I just quickly say something about the solution, Father Sam? The solution, like one of them, Hazrat Sahab, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih V has always given, is that the Muslim world should unite and stand behind Palestine. It appears that they do because of the statements and the fiery statements that keep coming from the leaders. Good for nothing. But they don't, they don't practically do anything. right? All they want, why Hazrat Khalifatul Masih's solution doesn't seem to satisfy them, probably, is because he's not ordering killing.
Yeah.
And I don't know why these Muslim leaders like to drill this idea of killing into the minds of people. And that needs to be looked into. But because that isn't something in foreseeable future, the unity of the Muslim Ummah. And we can talk about that some other time, why it's not. So the most viable solution that has been given, all right back from the time of Khalifatul Masih II, right to the time of Khalifatul Masih V, is that you need to solve this political problem through diplomacy and dialogue. And it has worked in the past, because in 1967, in what is famously known as the Six-Day War, Israel took into its fold so much territory, the Golan Heights, Gaza, West Bank, and the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. And overnight, their territory multiplied threefold, thrice. But then Egypt, through dialogue, they talked their way through. It took a lot of time from 1967. 1979, they started the talks, and by 1982, through talks, by bilateral talks, they were able to secure the Sinai Peninsula back and acquire a permanent border there. Jordan has done it in 1994 through talks. They've been able to acquire a permanent border. Lebanon doesn't have a border. It's got demarcation lines, which work as de facto border, but it's not a permanent border. But they're living in peace with Israel as well. So that is achievable, and that is the solution that Hazrat Khalifatul Masih has always given.
There's so much history in all of it, and we can talk about it honestly for hours.
Of course.
There's so much rich history. We are nearing the second episode or second period of this episode. I just want to bring in some questions which people are asking. One of the questions which we've been asked is why do we support the Royal British Legion when Britain is complicit in the atrocities against Palestine?
Yeah, so again, this is to do with, obviously you're part of a country, you're part of a nation, and this is an interesting question because also people raise this allegation on the Promised Messiah, Islam, in the sense that he was part of the colonial era. Why didn't he just, always go against the colonialists and the atrocities which they were doing as well? And a beautiful answer, which we've discussed before, is if you're living in the country, right? The first thing is, as the Islamic law is that you have to be law-abiding, right? And the second thing is, so you have to help your nation, right? Not in the atrocities. The condemnation always happens, even with Britain, right? But the fact that you're a taxpayer, anyone, you're supporting indirectly all of this. So anyone who says that why does the Jamaat do some fundraising for the British Army, you're already supporting the British Army just by paying your tax, right? The second thing is that, is the condemnation there? Yes, the condemnation's there again and again and again. And one thing which Muslims forget is that in these Western countries, you at least have the freedom to condemn the government in itself. But when they're in their own countries, the Muslim countries today, you can't condemn anything of the government. You get thrown in jail, right? So it's not support of the atrocities that are happening, but as a civilian, as a British member, right, as a Brit, you are obviously going to support, and you're going to support your nation, right? And where it's wrong and where it does commit atrocities, you are going to go against it. Tomorrow, if someone, God forbid, attacks the UK, we're going to support the British Army. This is our country, right? You're Brit, you're born and bred here. So you're not going to start saying, no, because you did some wrongs, therefore I'm not going to support you. Right? It's the end. You're going to finish.
And then, the army is actually protecting our borders, where we're living, where all other Muslims are living as well. These speakers in Speaker's Corner who stand up and criticize, Britain and this and that, and why didn't do that, and why the British Legion, why we shouldn't support them and all that. They just fail to remember that they're also enjoying the religious freedom they've been given. Another thing, Hamad, that you might want to give back to the Khudam who asked this question as part of your reply is that we would also like to know why Hazrat Zubair bin al-Awwam, Razi Allah Ta'ala anhu, a companion of the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, sent by the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam with a delegation of Muslims to the kingdom of Aksum, Abyssinia, Habsha, why they fought for the army of Negus, Najashi. They were companions. They were working and doing everything under the instruction of the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Bring us an answer.
And that's a
And
Christian nation.
Yeah. And Negus was obviously the leader of that Christian nation at the time. So I think that pretty much answers that question. It's pretty clear. Look, if you're living in a country,
Exactly.
you're going to support the country. You're paying the tax. You're automatically supporting
And
it.
look, where the atrocities are, right? The Jamaat in itself, our Khulafa, they speak against them. And it's not like they don't speak against them. Where if Britain is doing an injustice, this is why I say, pick up the compilation of Hazur's sermons and addresses to these world powers, right? Where he goes to the UN, the European Union, Capitol Hill, British Parliament, all these different organizations. World Crisis and Pathway to Peace. Just read that. Hazur at their face is telling them what you're doing is unjust. You are committing atrocities. You are going against what the UN was meant to stand for. Hazur was saying that the League of Nations failed. Now you're failing the United Nations. It's on, and it's to their face. It's not like, it's right in front of them, and he's saying it
while they're seated.
While they're seated there. Yeah.
That's what you call eyeball to eyeball.
Yeah, exactly. And what other, by the way, what other Muslim leader is doing that today? Who has the moral fortitude to do that? Even in terms of Muslim nations and countries, they can't. They don't have
For
that.
them, it's just a blaming game completely.
Absolutely.
One other question that we're getting as well is that why don't we, as a community, go on these pro-Palestinian marches and shroud ourselves with the Palestinian flag, like we see going on
Why
today?
don't we do that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a very nice question. Very interesting one. What result has it brought? I mean, as Ahmadis, the approach of the Ahmadiyya leadership, again, we'd like to mention here, is a very pragmatic approach, as it should be. As pragmatic as Islam actually is itself, what results is it bringing back? Has it done absolutely anything, shrouding ourselves in Palestinian flags and standing outside, say, the Houses of Parliament or outside a certain embassy? Tell me one single good result that it's brought back, and I'll be the first one to shroud myself in a flag and walk the streets of London.
Yeah, exactly.
So, the guidance of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, the day he tells us, all right, I think this can bring back results, all of us are going to march on the streets.
Yeah.
What come may. But then, as long as it's not bringing back any results, what's the point? We do register our protest very strongly, but very peacefully. That is Ahmadiyya. That is the beauty of Ahmadiyya.
Right. So we also want to remind everyone that this is a live show, so please keep submitting your questions and we'll do our best to answer them completely. Is there anything else, Fadl, that you want to add?
This is a question which comes off this, and Khudam asked this a lot as well, is why don't we just boycott Israel? Boycott their products. So if you remember in 2021 on social media, there's this huge, voice to boycott Israeli products, and they would put up. Hazur gave the most beautiful answer to this. He said, if you boycott Israeli products or Israel as a whole, you're going to be affecting innocent people as well at the same time. People who are needy, people who actually need to make a living. And by the way, in Israel, the factories, the Israeli factories, there's Palestinians working there as well. So you'll be harming Palestinians by boycotting those products as well. Yeah. Then you've seen on social media, there's lots of Jews and Israelis who are against all of this atrocity that's been happening in Gaza. They're going out onto the streets, they're speaking, they're coming onto news channels, and they're saying that this is against our Jewish teaching. It's against Judaism in itself. So, number one, you'll be affecting the people who actually need to make a living, and they're not part of this, right? You'll be affecting Palestinians. So where does that go, right? Who are working in these Israeli factories and Israeli companies, and they're making a living, and that's the only living, by the way, that they're going to make, right? Living in an occupied land, okay? Living in apartheid, living in the West Bank, so on and so forth. And then you're also affecting those people who are actually against this, who are against the bombing of Gaza and West Bank and the whole situation that's been happening. So boycott won't take you anywhere.
Yeah, and you know,
And it won't work.
as it's interesting that this happened in 2021.
Yeah.
This call for boycott.
Yeah.
Let's go 100 years back, exactly in the early 1920s, and we find Indian Muslims calling for boycotting British products in India.
Okay.
And we have Hazrat Muslim Maud Talano giving detailed guidance on Tarke Mualat, as they called it, boycotting the British products. Non-cooperation movement. Hazrat Muslim said, only you will suffer. And again, this, what you very beautifully said, you know, the livelihood of many people will be at stake. So everything needs to be taken into consideration. All of this is emotionality. It's not brought back anything at all. And it's never going to bring back anything at all.
You know, one thing I saw, which I also wanted to ask you about, is this element of. So we're talking about the Ahmadiyya history with Palestine and this whole area, of Hazrat Sir Jodi Zafrullah Khan Sahib and his efforts towards the Palestinian cause. I think that would be good for the Qudam as well to listen into that, because the thing is, he has been the most powerful Muslim voice for this whole cause as well. And Khudam need to tell that to the rest of the Muslims.
They need to tell that. And again, it goes back to reading history and acquainting yourself to it. Hazrat Sir Zafrullah Khan Razillah Ta'ala Anhu was, I would say, the sole spokesperson that Palestine and Palestinian Muslims have ever had. He was the one who stood up with the strongest case. How he said that the two-state solution was not a viable solution.
Sorry, I'm sorry for breaking up. I think we need to explain who he was as well. His rank.
I'm sorry. Yes, Hazrat Zafrullah Khan was a very prominent Ahmadi and a companion of the Prophet Muhammad and a confidant of Hazrat Muslim Maud. But alongside that, I want to keep these two things separate for very important reasons. He was a bureaucrat. He was part of the political machinery of India before the partition, and then he became the first foreign minister of Pakistan. In the first ever cabinet that Jinnah ever made, Zafrullah Khan was the first foreign minister and remained so for quite a few years. And as soon as Pakistan became independent, and as soon as the issue of Palestine, the Palestine question was raised in the General Assembly of United Nations, there were two ad hoc committees that were created. So Zafrullah Khan led one of them. So Zafrullah Khan, with his subcommittee, with his ad hoc committee, having considered the issue in detail, came to the podium with the only single viable, realistic, pragmatic solution to the Palestinian question that has ever been made. Give the right to decide the fate of Palestine in the hands of the indigenous people. The natives, they have the first and the last right to do that.
Because they are the ultimate.
They're the ones.
They're the ones who've been living there the entire time.
And he started off his speech by saying that I want to remind the House here about the history, how it's unfolded. And he took it back to the First World War and the Ottoman Empire siding with Germany, and the way we just spoke about right at the start. So he said this is where it all starts. This is the type of correspondence that happened between King Hussein, Shah Hussein, the Sharif of Mecca, and the British government. The Hogarth message, and this, and this is how it's happened. And the only solution is that the decision should be given in their hands. The two-state solution is not a viable solution.
Yeah.
It's the land of the Muslims. Now, it's interesting, you see, because like I said, Zafrullah Khan did not ignore the fact that both the nations, the Jews and the Muslims, were living up to some kind of a religious association to it, right? It was the promised land for the Jews, for the Bani Israel, children of Israel. It was a promised land, as stated in the Holy Quran quite clearly, for the Muslims. But what Muslims keep forgetting is that Allah, when promising it, I mean, the Torah is quite clear, you know, it just says it's for the Jews. But the Quran, the last scripture to come from Allah the Almighty, clearly states about this land, Yarisuha ibadiyus salihun. Those who will inherit it will be my obedient, righteous, pious servants. That's a very big question for the Muslims to consider first before claiming.
I just want to go through a few more questions which are coming in. One more question is that, which one of our Khuddam has asked is, what has the Jamaat done for any other country who has faced atrocities, not just Palestine. What has Jamaat done in other areas of the world as well, which have also faced atrocities?
Quickly, because I know you're running short of time and you've got quite a few questions to throw at us. For Kashmir, the way has Muslim Maud who stood up for Kashmir, and it wasn't only on his own accord. He had solutions. He would express them, voice them in his Friday sermons and through other means. But it was the Muslim leaders of British India that requested his Muslim to be the leader. He led it through. And I say this again with a lot of responsibility, Hamad. I'm taking a lot of responsibility today on me. The only one time that the Muslims of British India stood behind one single leader was when Hazrat Muslim Maud, Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad, was the president of the All India Kashmir Committee. He would say sit and the Muslims would sit. He would say stand and they would stand. One single occasion that happened was behind the Khalifa of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat. Kashmir, Bosnia, Palestine, so many examples. We've done what we could.
And this Bosnia example,
yes,
during Khalifa Rabi Rahmullah's time, that's where Humanity First was born out of.
Absolutely.
Right? And now Humanity First is helping throughout the world, including in Palestine, in areas of Palestine as well. One thing which I wanted to mention also is all of this, which Asif has mentioned of Hazrat Sir Zafrullah Khan Sahib Raziyallahu Anhu, and before him, Khalifa Sani Raziyallahu Anhu, this was praised by the Arabs themselves. It wasn't like they're speaking in an echo chamber or anything. They picked up on this. Newspapers published great praise of Khalifa Sani's Raziyallahu Anhu's analysis and his guidance, right? And then Sir Zafrullah Khan Sahib Raziyallahu Anhu as well. He was known as a world figure anyway in the area of politics. And they all praised him. This is not, so our history is so rich. And if Khuddam go and read about this, they'll be, they will feel even stronger in their Ahmadi identity, that the Jamaat has done so much for the Muslim cause, like you're saying, the Kashmir, the partition of India and Pakistan, and then Palestine as well.
Do you want to also mention King Faisal's letter to Sir Zafrullah Khan, appreciating that what you've done is a wonderful contribution to us?
Just to confirm for everyone as well, King Faisal
of Saudi Arabia. So he wrote to Sir Zafrullah Khan stating that what you've done as the King of Saudi Arabia, signed, and saying that what you've done in the United Nations General Assembly is the best thing that could happen to Palestine. And then the King of Jordan as well, etc.
In fact, there's an article on Al-Hakam where you can, so our Khuddam can go onto Al-Hakam, maybe you can put it in the comments or the show captions, about Hazrat Zafrullah Khan Sahib's praise, particularly about the praise for what he did for the Palestinian cause. There's archival material there, there's cutting of newspapers there, like you're saying, that letter as well. And they can go read, and there's so much material on alhakam.org and other Jamaat publications, of course. You have the Review of Religions, you have the True Islam, all these, about the whole history of what the Jamaat's done for the Palestine cause and so many others. And I think it's a point where now Khuddam, they're getting involved in these issues. There's questions, but you need to educate yourself as well as a khadim,
of course,
in the sense that there's so much history there. It's all well and good asking questions, and questions are good, but the answers are, you get a much better in-depth answer when you go out and you read and you discover it for yourself. And I know personally so many khuddam who have, this is their own interest, and they go and they've researched this whole element of Sir Zafrullah Khan Sahib, Hazrat Muslim Maud's efforts for this whole cause, and they are almost experts on themselves as well. And there's so many different areas.
It's such a rich history, and the solutions are all there. Sometimes it can be really difficult. One other question that I've got is sometimes it is really difficult witnessing all that's happening. Just the other day there was a bombing of a hospital. Women, children, innocent people, lives were lost. Sometimes it's really difficult to see this stuff on Twitter and Instagram. How can Khuddam deal with these feelings, and what's a safe way to express these feelings?
So I understand as well. I've also just stopped going onto Twitter sometimes. You need breaks, and I've spoken to so many Khuddam, like, we just can't look at it. And it is weird that it's 2023 and you're going through your feed and you're just seeing dead bodies.
Absolutely.
That bombing of the hospital that we just saw yesterday, they were doing a press conference surrounded by bodies, kids, right? It's horrifying. And that's why, I don't understand why world powers are not asking for a ceasefire. But in terms of what to do. In Islam, it sounds simple, but it's the most effective thing. Is if you really want to understand, like regulate your emotions, it's at the prayer mat, right? There's no other way. It's at the prayer mat, and this is what Hazur told us in his last sermon, that the only weapon we have is the weapon of prayer. Therefore, all Ahmadis should use this weapon more than ever before. And Hazur's always said that use this weapon of prayer, because we believe, we actually, as Ahmadi Muslims, we believe that there is a direct result of prayer.
Hazur said last week in his Friday sermon that this is the strongest weapon we have. So
yeah,
prayer.
Exactly. It's prayer. So, and it's not like, these aren't mere words, right? The Khulafa and act on this as well themselves more than everyone else. And so we should follow that, go to the prayer mat, should let our emotions that I'm sure everyone has right now, seeing all these atrocities, lay out there, pray for the Palestinians. Allah will, console, help you as well personally, in terms of your own emotions. And in fact, all the Khulafa have said this as well, that we should pray. In fact, when we talk about Khalifa Rabi rahimahullah as well, and his message when he became Khalifa, he said the same thing, pray. Like, you don't have anything else. And we have to, realize that it's prayers which has always helped the Jamaat in all our different avenues and our success. Because we forget that it's not comparing, but Ahmadis are also persecuted. We're a persecuted community. We all know people are being persecuted right now as well, right?
Some people have family members.
They have family members, right, who have actually been killed, martyred. And the solution, which our Khulafa have always given, which is embedded in Islam very deeply, is pray to Allah and ask Allah for help.
Absolutely. Any situation you come in, prayer just comes down to it. One other question that we've had, which a lot of people are also asking as well, is whilst each side is blaming the other, there's a blame game going on, what does Islam tell us about such attacks?
As in, Islam tells us what we've just heard from His Khalifa al-Masih in his Friday sermon, and what we've just heard, Father Sahib has just quoted and referred to. And there's so much going on. I mean, how can you decide? It's a very difficult situation. We're living in a very precarious world. It's a very strange world, and it's a really scary one as well. Because you never know, and Azur touched upon this issue, you never know whether the footage is even genuine or not. It could be from elsewhere and then being posted on, saying, oh, this is what's happening, or this is what Hamas has done, or this is what Israel has done.
Oh no, we were wrong about that.
Yeah. So I think what should be done is, you weigh in the situations and what at hand, and see what seems to be right, what seems to be wrong. We as Ahmadis are very lucky and very fortunate to have leadership, to have Hazrat Khalifa al-Masih, to stand behind him. And that reminds me of the Imam Mahdi question again, that they say that Imam Mahdi is going to... Well, how are you going to even unite behind Imam Mahdi? Because at the moment you can't even unite behind a single Imam. Not even for prayers. You say, no, I can't pray behind this because he's Debandi, he's Barelvi, he's Aladis, he's Salafi, he's this, is that. Learn to unite at least first behind an Imam, and then let's dream about Imam Mahdi coming back as they still expect him to. So, so we have leadership, and we know this is where, because he spearheads anything, and we know that he takes responsibility. When he tells us to do something, he takes responsibility, and that is a huge burden that sits on the shoulders of Hazrat Khalifa al-Masih, because there's a whole nation behind him. So any guidance we receive from there, we have to follow it in letter and spirit.
The guidance for all the other Muslim countries is unity is what is needed right now.
Absolutely.
We can't be pointing fingers
one
to each
thing
other.
we also have to mention is whatever Khalifa al-Masih is saying is from the teachings of Islam, from the Quran, from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The Holy Prophet ﷺ said, help the oppressor and the oppressed, right? And giving an explanation to this, he said, stop the hand of the person who is oppressing. How do you help him? You stop him. And this is what Hazur was saying. The international community needs to now come in and stop Israel doing all these atrocities. The response is not proportionate, right? This whole argument which you're hearing everywhere that they've got human shields, Hamas. This isn't the first time Israel is bombing Gaza, right? It's happened year after year after year. and the casualties have always been Palestinians more and Israelis less. Has it ever stopped any attacks? No, it hasn't, right? Logically it doesn't make sense. Someone attacks you, runs into a building full of civilians. You don't go and just bomb that building just because you're saying that they're being human shields, right? It doesn't make any logical sense. And historically, has it ever happened that a military force has destroyed the terrorists, quote unquote, by bombing a whole city? It's
right
never
now,
happened.
I think that this conflict which is happening, it's one of the few in the past few years social media has now come out, so it's very easy to be swayed one way, swayed the other. You see it all on social media. One question that's come through is, what is the role of social media users in sharing the news which is shared by people from Gaza? What should their role be? Should they be...
I think the first thing which the Quran says also is that whenever someone brings a fasik, in fact, some news, then make sure you see if that news is correct or wrong, right? So that's an Islamic principle, right? You have to see if it's correct, you have to be timely. That's what we see with our khulafa as well. They don't just, it's very timely, like you're saying, it's in a very majestic way, which has balance, which has understanding. And the other thing with social media, I think everyone is quite educated with social media themselves now as well. There's so much misinformation going everywhere. We know in this particular situation, there's a lot of misinformation happening as well. You have the 40 babies being decapitated, which we knew was false news. There's so many other things, right? I don't want to get into that, and everyone knows that. So you have to be very careful about what you're looking at in terms of identify and jumping to conclusions very quickly. And also, it's just this fatigue as well. You can't become desensitized to the whole situation.
And another important thing that the Ahmadi social media users should do is that also seeing that what type of an image is being painted of Islam on social media, and contribute our 2 pence there to state that no, Islam does not support or call for terrorism or does not approve of terrorism. Like I said, it's important to differentiate, because at the moment it's kill the Jews, kill this, kill that. No, Islam does not teach that. Islam is not, it can't, because the Holy Prophet of Islam was Rahmatul lil Alameen, mercy for all mankind. So when they say, oh, kill the Jews, no, Islam doesn't teach that. The issue with the Zionists and the Israeli authorities at the moment is a different one from theology. It's a purely geopolitical issue, and it should be resolved like that. And it's for the Palestinian Muslims to now realize there was a Zafrullah Khan. There is never going to be another Zafrullah Khan.
I think that's a great ending point there. I would love to talk about this. Any just small, very short 10-second, 20-second closing remarks by both of you?
I will repeat. There was a Zafrullah Khan to speak for them in the General Assembly. There will never be one again. Never ever. Nobody from the Muslim world is ever going to speak for them. The only one person who has spoken for them in the most pragmatic manner is being the leader of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat. That is the only viable solution, and they need to listen to that. They need to find their voice, because relying on the Muslim Ummah, so-called, supposed, is not going to work. It hasn't worked and it won't. So there's only one voice now that speaks for you.
100%. Fatir Sahib?
Yeah, same. I would just reiterate what Asab said. I can't add more to that. I think that's
I think
a
you
good
can't
ending.
get any better than that. So we've reached the end, and we could speak for ages, absolutely ages. But I think we've realised that our ultimate guide is Khalifatul Masih. And towards the end, we just want to share with the viewers just one short clip from the previous Friday sermon, and we would like to share this clip with everyone. But Jazakallah for tuning in, and Jazakallah for listening.
ऐसे हालात में मुसलमान मुल्कों को कम से कम होश के नाखून लेने चाहिए, अपने इख्तिलाफात मिटाकर अपनी वादत को कायम करना चाहिए। अगर मुसलमानों को ये हिदायत अल्लाह ताला ने अहले किताब से ताल्लुकात बेहतर करने के लिए दी है कि तालो इला कलिमतिन सवाइन बैनना व बैनकुम, इस कलमे की तरफ आ जाओ जो हमारे और तुम्हारे दरमियान मुश्तरक है, अल्लाह ताला की ज़ात है। तो मुसलमान जिनका कलमा मुकम्मल तौर पर एक है, क्यों इख्तिलाफात ख़त्म करके इकट्ठे नहीं हो सकते? बस सोचें اور اپنی عبادت کو قائم کریں، اور یہی دنیا سے فساد دور کرنے کا ذریعہ ہو سکتا ہے۔ اور انصاف کے تقاضے پورے کرنے کے لیے مظلوم کے حقوق ہر جگہ قائم کرنے کے لیے بھرپور آواز اٹھائیں، پھر ایک ہو کر ایک ہوں گے، وحدت ہوگی تو آواز میں بھی طاقت ہوگی، ورنہ معصوم مسلمانوں کی جانوں کے ضائع ہونے کے یہ لوگ ذمہ دار ہوں گے، وہ مسلمان حکومتیں ذمہ دار ہوں گی۔ حضرت صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم کی اس ارشاد کو ہمیشہ سامنے رکھنا چاہیے، اور یہ ان طاقتوں کا کام ہے رکھیں کہ ظالم اور مظلوم دونوں کی مدد کرو، بس اس اہم بات کو سمجھیں۔ اللہ تعالیٰ مسلمان حکومتوں کو بھی عقل اور سمجھ دے، اور ایک ہو کر انصاف قائم کرنے والے بنے، اور دنیا کی طاقتوں کو بھی عقل اور سمجھ دے کہ دنیا کو تباہی میں ڈالنے کے بجائے دنیا کو تباہی سے بچانے کی کوشش کریں، اور اپنی اناؤں کی تسکین کو اپنا مقصد نہ بنائیں۔ ہمیشہ انہیں یاد رکھنا چاہیے کہ جب تباہی ہوگی تو یہ طاقتیں بھی محفوظ نہیں رہیں گی۔ بہرحال ہمارے پاس تو دعا ہی کا اختیار ہے، اسے ہر احمدی کو پہلے سے بڑھ کر استعمال کرنا چاہیے۔